Hello and welcome to Alta Live. I am so excited to welcome you to today's discussion on the life and legacy of Marion Davies. My name is Beth Spotswood. I'm Alta's digital editor. Joining us today is Lara Gabrielle, author of a new biography on Davies titled Captain of Her Soul, The Life of Marion Davies. Davies, as most of you likely know, was a Hollywood starlet, but she is most commonly remembered as the mistress of media mogul William Randolph Hearst. Lara's book seeks to change that perception, explore the life, Davies' life as it was as a kind of a full-bodied woman with her own kind of identity, separate from the label of her partner. We're joined today by William Randolph Hearst's grandson, Will Hurst. He is editor and publisher of Alta Journal, as well as chairman of the Hearst Corporation. Will, in fact, penned his own review of Lara's book in the latest issue of Alta Journal. Marion Davies in her own terms. It's a personal, deeply personal, kind of unique perspective of the book that I encourage you to read. And if you haven't already, don't worry, we're going to send you a link as well as include it in the chat. Lara and will be in conversation today with William Deverell. Bill is the director of the Huntington USC Institute on California and the West, and a beloved professor at the University of Southern California. Before they begin, some brief housekeeping. Alta Live is the digital interview series we do here at Alta Journal. If you are unfamiliar with Alta, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. You can join us as a digital member for as little as $3 a month, or get an annual subscription, $50 a year. You get 4 gorgeous issues of Alta, a California Book Club upcoming book, as well as a very chic California Book Club hat. We host California Book Club, a free monthly series, weekly events like this, Alta Live, a number of free newsletters, an incredible website. If you've been considering joining us as a paying member, I so hope that you will click that button and commit to Alta. We make a great holiday gift. We make a great hostess gift. I'm going to, of course, send you links to all of this. But again, I know so many of you have been considering it in that little poll we send at the end. So please do join us at Alta. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of our guests. They're going to chat for about 30 minutes. Then Bill's going to ask me back, and I will ask any of your questions you have. So pop your questions in that Q&A button. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later this afternoon. We will also send you an email with a link to the video, where you can buy Lara's book, a copy of Will's review, and anything else that pops up today. It's so great to be here with our community today. I see Eagle Rock, California, Cupertino, Burbank. I'm here in Novato, California. It would be great if you'd let us pop into the chat and let us know where you're zooming in from. And with that, I am delighted to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Bill Deverell.
Thanks, Beth. I'm thrilled to be here. Love what Alta stands for, what Alta does, and really admire the folks that work up there who've become dear friends and colleagues over the years. So very grateful to be asked to be here. I want to start just by reading the first line of Will's review of this new book in Alta magazine. It just catches your eye immediately, and it says, "It isn't every day you are asked to review the biography of your grandfather's mistress." So it's a great way to begin a review. It's not your usual dry tone in a review. And as Beth pointed out, the review goes on into very intimate, personal kind of reflections about Will's life and the life of his grandfather and the life of Marion Davies and everyone in between. So it's a great opportunity to talk to Lara. Lara, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And it's great to meet you. I want to start just with you, Lara. Just when did you first know about Marion Davies?
It's a tough question because I've been interested in classic film and classic Hollywood for a long time, since I was a little kid. But I can say that I first began to think about Marion Davies, we can say, when I was about 13, and I received as part of a birthday present this book called The Times We Had, which has been marketed as Marion Davies' memoir for so many years. And I read that book, and even at that young age, at 13, I realized what an interesting life she had, and what an unusual life she had, and how this story hasn't really been told very well. so she was always at the back of my mind as an interesting subject. And when I started a classic film blog in 2011, and I realized how much I loved the research and the writing, started thinking about doing something bigger, and Marion Davies was the first and best name that came to mind. And it's been 9 years since I've been writing this, and it's been a joy.
Wow, congratulations. And just to remind our robust audience out there, that is Marion that's looking over your shoulder at all of us, correct?
Yes, that is Marion Davies. Yeah, it's a
Great.
publicity poster from MGM.
Great. So Will, let me turn to you. Before we discuss Marion Davies and her life and legacy, I just want to know, what was it like to grow up under the kind of imposing shadow of this colossus of your grandfather? Just tell us about who was he to the young Will Hurst III?
Well, when you're a kid, you don't really have an understanding of history other than, last week. And when I was a kid, we would go for summers out to San Simeon, to where the castle is. And at that time, I was born in 49. My grandfather died in 51. So we're talking about the late 1950s. I would have been 10 years old or so. And at that point, the castle was still part of the estate of my grandfather. So it was just this kind of big, kind of abandoned building with a few groundskeepers and a couple of other people that were sort of keeping it up and running. And we went there for summers and stayed there and went swimming in the pool and kind of had the run of the place. But as a kid, you don't really think of that as anything special. That's just what you're doing for the summer. And when the castle became a public park, it was kind of an expensive thing for the Hearst Company to keep up. And I think a lot of the executives thought, oh, it's a white elephant. We have no use. This is the boss's sort of pleasure palace. They didn't see any sort of opportunity to merchandise it the way, Walt Disney would have likely seen it. So it was a plan to kind of try to donate it to some sort of charitable institution and get rid of it. It was offered to the University of California for a medieval studies center, and they didn't want it. And eventually it went to the California Division of Beaches and Parks, who took it over and ran it sort of like the Breakers in Newport, which was Cornelius Vanderbilt's house. But it wasn't until really the tours started going through there, and I was listening to the tours, and now I'm 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and I'm hearing about Marion Davies and my grandfather's affair with her, and I'm thinking, whoa, this is not dinner table conversation. No one has told me anything about this. So I remember one day my dad and mom talking about someone called MD, and I thought maybe we had a doctor in the family or something, but there was like a code phrase. So anyway, little by little, I became a little more aware that there was this other existence of the castle. And of course, as a college student, I saw Citizen Kane and, kind of compare and contrast that vision of my grandfather with what I had experienced as this wonderful, bright, fun, pleasure, place with flowers and beautiful buildings. And so it took a while to kind of get everything into register. That's why I was very glad to see Lara's book come out, because I thought, oh, somebody's really doing this as a real biography. They're not just doing a walking tour of the building.
Right. And I think there's a real contrast to your early life and basically unaware of Marion Davies by probably familial design. And gradually, as you say, getting to know a little bit more about her. Whereas for you, Lara, to tackle a biography of Marion Davies, you have to cut through all kinds of information that is largely, thanks to you, been put aside because you've done this deep dive. Tell us a little bit about just who she was, where's she from, and why do you think the legendary Marion Davies, for better or worse, is the one that you had to do battle with?
Sure. To answer your initial questions about who she is and where she's from, she was born in Brooklyn in 1897, so turn of the century. And she was one of 5 siblings. She had she had 3 sisters and a brother who died very young. And she started out as a chorus girl. She started her career as in the Ziegfeld shows and the Dillingham shows and those places in New York. And she met Hearst actually organically through a family friend. Well, not a family friend, but a person that she was going out with. And they met, at a restaurant, Delmonico's. And then from there, Paul Block, the person who she was going with, financed her first movie. And Hearst fell in love with her on the screen, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about. And so she was always known from the time she was young as a vivacious, ebullient, energetic personality. And that's who she was. And when Hearst started designing her career, we could say he wanted her to be seen the way he saw her, which was this ethereal, angelic beauty, young, and he put her in these roles that were maybe not her strong suit, right? I mean, he would surround her with these imposing sets, put her in heavy costumes, and she, really wanted to do comedy and all this. Finally, she asserted herself and made her own career as a comedian later on in the 1920s. And so that really, I think, also speaks to a strength of character that maybe hasn't been explored very much, a real willingness to not allow anybody to put anything on her that she didn't want. And she says that the title of my book comes from something that Marion said about herself. I'm the captain of my soul, right? And it comes from a poem, right? And Poem Invictus. And I really think that that's true, that she was a very strong, very independent-minded person. In terms of the legend of Marion Davies, I think a lot of it has been informed, unfortunately, by Citizen Kane. People assume that Kane is Hearst, Susan Alexander is Marion Davies, when in reality there's a mixture of historical people in both Kane and Susan Alexander. People think she was untalented, that she was controlled by Hearst, and neither of those things are true. So Citizen Kane has really done a number on Marion Davies. And I think that that's really the biggest thing that I've had to fight against, because people come up to me and they say, oh, the woman from Citizen Kane. And I have to say, well, actually, no, in many ways, no. And so through archival research and through interviews with people who knew Marion, I've come to find this woman who was she really was in control of her own life.
Yeah, it's amazing how the caricature has really made her into basically a silhouette of a person, where your book humanizes her and gives her all kinds of depth. Will, I have what may seem like an odd question for you, but the agency of Marion, the captain of her soul, the strong-willed, talented actress, a woman pushing against convention. Is there any echo for you of your great-grandmother, Phoebe, here?
Well, I am under the impression that my great-grandmother was, I would say, unhappy that her son was interested in chorus girls and actresses, and she sort of aspired to a more social marriage for her son. And so she was a bit interfering, a bit hovering up until the time that she died. And it wasn't until 1919, when she died, that my grandfather felt free to spend more money, to start building San Simeon, to be more open in his relationship with Marion. So they're both strong-willed women who sort of wanted to do things their own way, and that comes out in Lara's book. But I don't imagine they were good friends or had tea together and shared observations. But maybe I'm wrong. History sometimes surprises you.
Yeah, Phoebe, if jump in a moment here.
Sure.
That Phoebe died in 1919. I'm not even sure that she knew much about Marion. She might have had an inkling, but they kept it pretty hidden from Phoebe, because they knew that her reaction would not be good.
Yeah. So Lara, take us through, and Will, feel free to contribute, obviously. Take us through their Southern California social world. It's a who's who of the transition from silent film into studio system and talkies and the great glory days of Hollywood. Take us through that, and who were they close to? Everyone knew, of course, that Marion and Will were together. Take us through that kind of social world of friendship.
Well, Marion, it's interesting. So I have Marion's autobiographical tapes, and Marion was asked on her autobiographical tapes about this world that she lived in, and the person who was interviewing her said, "I think that your world is much more tolerant," meaning the world of Hollywood, which I think is a pretty accurate statement. There were a lot of people who were living pretty unconventional lives in Hollywood at that time. And so she and her people knew about their relationship. They took pains to hide it from the public. They generally didn't appear at events together. But the people in Hollywood knew, certainly. And they would have parties together. They threw joint parties, and people from all over the industry would come. So we have, in the early 30s, we've got Joan Crawford coming to parties. We've got Charlie Chaplin appearing at parties and things like that. So we've got some pretty recognizable names.
And a lot of press people, like
and a lot of press people, yes. Yeah, so they had joint friends, so the Hollywood, those were the Hollywood people, and then they would have all the Hearst columnists and things who would come
my impression is that my grandfather, his original plan was to get a divorce, and his wife in that era, it was very difficult to get a divorce unless you could show some cause. The no fault concept didn't really exist. So he either had to get her permission to separate, or he had to go into court and make all kinds of accusations about her, whatever, infidelity, whatever. And I think he just didn't want to do that. They had 5 sons together. I don't think their relationship was easy at the end, but often a man with a mistress has a difficult time with his actual wife, so they quarreled. But I think at some point he realized, well, the divorce thing isn't going to go. That's not going to happen. And I think then when his mother died, he could be a little more open. But you're certainly right, Lara. I mean, they invited people up to San Simeon in busloads, 20 and 30. So they were very public in their circle, but not public in the press sense.
Right.
Which is funny because he was a press,
Right.
but the press didn't write about John Kennedy's infidelities, even though it was widely known by press people, because in that era it was just not done.
Right,
Yeah.
much more circumspect. Yeah.
Yeah, at least in the 1920s, and I'm sure beyond that, there was sort of an unwritten rule that you didn't write about people's private lives unless they showed up in court, right?
Right.
So some of the earliest instances of Marion and WR's names appearing in the press together are when there was some court case when their names were invoked, which I go into in the book. It's a couple of
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I discovered reading your book is that she was a relatively shrewd businesswoman.
Yes, she was.
Who managed her own money, and ended up owning stock and various rights in the Hearst company and managed those and didn't try to make trouble or, exert herself as a kind of power behind the throne. She just sort of managed her financial affairs, got herself comfortable, got herself secure, owned property.
Yeah.
And, I think that's a side of her that is not in the Orson Welles portrayal. that
Certainly,
she was
Right,
yes.
right.
She,
Quite a shrewd businesswoman.
Yeah,
Yes, she was. And I think
Laura,
part of that-
oh,
what was
I'm
that?
sorry, Laura, go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say that I think part of that comes from the fact that she grew up in a relatively modest background. She grew up with a family that struggled with money. And so she learned that she needed to save. She learned that she needed to save money and how to save money. And she was earning her own money very young. At 16 years old, she was earning her own money. So she had to learn quickly how to do that. And so she was very good with she was good at math, good at numbers, good with sort of figuring those things out. So she was able to do it, and she just had a natural knack for it. Plus, this background, I think, helped a lot.
And the unflattering portrayal of the Marion Davies character in Citizen Kane. Laura, you noted, I think, that Orson Welles wrote to Marion Davies to apologize for that characterization. Is that correct?
Well, he didn't write to her to apologize, but when what's been marketed as the memoir, The Times We Had, came out after Marion's death, Orson Welles wrote the foreword, right? He wrote the foreword to this book, The Times We Had, which is sort of a posthumous cut and paste of Marion's autobiographical tapes. And he said, it's a beautiful, beautiful foreword that he wrote. And he also has said in subsequent interviews, it was a dirty trick, right? I really do think he was genuinely sorry about it. And I don't think that he actually meant what he.
Yeah, I mean, it's a movie after all. It's not, it wasn't meant to be a documentary.
Yes.
So
and
he took license with, he needed a character like Susan Alexander, so he created one.
Yeah, and
that made
Marion,
the story a little easier to understand.
Right. People ask me a lot what Marion thought about Citizen Kane.
Good question.
And she said, she was asked about it on her autobiographical tapes, and so I've heard her say, who am I to tell Orson Welles how to make his movie?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she understood pretty clearly.
And
there's one thing I came to understand much later in life. There's a book by Lou Pizzatola about Hearst in the movies.
It's a brilliant book, yes.
Yeah, well, I forget the title.
Hearst Over Hollywood. Yeah,
Hearst Over Hollywood. It's really a good book.
It is.
And it was considered to be a bit critical of my grandfather, but I didn't read it that way. I read it as sort of a scholarly investigation. But one of the things that comes out of it, to my way of thinking, is that even though my grandfather was known as a press baron and newspapers were his milieu, he in fact became quite interested in film and show business very early in his life, probably in the 20s, long before his Citizen Kane era. And so Marion was somebody who was an actress, and it was a field that he was interested in. And I think in some ways he would like to have seen himself as a movie mogul rather than a newspaper baron.
Yes, and he, talking about his interest in film, it went all the way back to 1898 with the Spanish-American War. He sent film crews to Cuba. I mean, he actually went there himself as well to Cuba to film the war alongside Edison and the other people who were filming the war. And it was the first time that a war had been shot in real time.
Wow,
that's interesting.
And so he was doing that because he realized the power of film.
Yeah. We're going to turn things over to Beth in a minute to take in some of the audience questions, but I do want to get your responses, both of you, to another theme of the book, which is to humanize Marion Davies, to make her three-dimensional, to make her into a real woman who's got these skills and agency and ability to move through these various parts of her life. That's one act of recovery from the caricature. But the other is really powerful, and it takes up a good chunk of Will's review. It's just how much in love they were. They're together for decades. Will, does it surprise you to find just a deep love story at the heart of this book and this relationship?
Well, I wrote Lara about this. I think that's the inescapable conclusion, because normally if you want, a trophy wife, or you want a girlfriend, you can have that, and then you go on to the next one and the next one and the next one. But they really stayed together. And some of the quotes that are in Lara's book from Marion herself about, why would I ever want to be with somebody else? Because I know he loved me and I loved him. It just sort of comes out of the behavior. It's the inevitable conclusion that they had a very good relationship. They enjoyed each other's company. There was quite a bit of difference in age, so it was very likely that she would survive him. So they just, had their thing together, and they enjoyed each other. And they were together for what? I'm thinking from 1920 something until 1950.
Yeah, it's hard to say. By 1919, they were an established couple, and then he died in 51.
Right, so at least 30 years, maybe a little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Lara? Just in uncovering this love affair. It's
really remarkable. One of my favorite stories is that when WR, that's what Marion called Hearst, when he was close to death, he would write her love notes every night on yellow foolscap paper and slip them under her door. And I've seen some of those notes, and they are so beautiful. And Marion was with him, taking care of him every moment. This is love. Yeah. They were deeply in love and soulmates.
Well, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
It's Captain of Her Soul, The Life of Marion Davies, just out from the University of California Press. A rich portrait across, decades and decades and decades of the life and biography of this person, but also the backdrop of Hollywood and the move towards its power, and really takes William Randolph Hearst himself very seriously as a major figure, of course. So thank you for that. Will, thank you for the review in Alta. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Beth. We have a robust audience, I'm sure a lot of questions, and I'm happy to turn it over to Beth to harvest some of those questions for our panelists.
We do have a lot of questions. And I think that we all would like to get some love notes slipped under our door sometime soon. That sounds lovely. First question, I think for you, Lara, although maybe Will, you might have some insight into this. We received via email. Did Marion, we know that William Randolph Hearst worked a lot with the architect Julia Morgan, an incredibly talented architect of her day and of history. Did Marion get any input, offer input, design choices, suggestions when?
Yeah, it's a great question, because Marion didn't work directly with Julia Morgan. Julia Morgan worked with Hearst. But especially when we think about things like the Beach House, which was designed really for WR and Marion together, but Marion was always going to be the person who was going to live there the most. Marion, might say to WR, it would be really nice to have something in the Beach House, and then WR would pass that on to Julia Morgan. So it would sort of third hand, we might say. Yes, they knew each other. Marion and Julia Morgan did, not terribly well, but I've seen some of their Christmas cards that they've sent back and forth. It's really, really lovely.
Adele asks, and kind of along these lines, Marion Davies was an astute real estate investor. One of the properties she owned was the Desert Inn in Palm Springs from 1955 to 1960, but there is little info on this. Have you, Lara, come across any photos or more information about this?
Yeah, I have some newspaper clippings of the Desert Inn, and Marion really loved the Desert Inn. It was one of her favorite properties, and she loved building it up. She had a dream to build it into like a really big resort, but it was a pipe dream. She was never really going to be able to do that, and it didn't quite work out. But but she loved going there, and she loved going there for dinner unannounced. She would often tell somebody, "Oh, I'm going to drive to the Desert Inn for dinner tonight." And the friend said, "Well, don't they know you're coming?" And she said, "Well, no, I just like to go there." And so the friends would sometimes secretly call ahead to the Desert Inn and say, "Miss Davies is coming. Can you fix her a nice dinner or something?" Yeah, it's a really fun little part of her life. She really enjoyed it.
We have a question for you, Will. What is your favorite room at Hearst Castle?
Oh, gee, well, I have a couple. I mean, I like the rooms up in the main building where my grandfather stayed. And I remember getting chicken pox or something in one of those rooms and having to be sort of sick there. So I feel like some affinity. And then there are some rooms in one of the guest houses called the A House that I'm very fond of. That just have beautiful view. I mean, I think it's the Casa del Mar. And when you are in the living room, my dad used to write his columns sitting there at his desk, and you were just looking out at the Pacific Ocean. And sometimes the fog is coming in, and sometimes you can see the lighthouse, but you just have this sense that you're in this Shangri-La kind of place. I think those are two favorites. And there's other little fun places. There's some little upstairs rooms in different places. A lot of these rooms were very charming. They had their own character, but those are a couple that I, spend enough time in. I have some real affinity.
Well, chickenpox alone. Did Mr. Hearst and Ms. Davies spend any time at the Hearst Ranch inland from San Simeon?
I don't know. At one time, the Hearst, the ranch is an interesting thing. It still exists. It's still part of the Hearst company. It was originally a Spanish land grant that was acquired by my great-grandfather for 50 cents an acre, 12 miles on the California coast. And my grandfather added to it, and what is now Hunter Liggett was once part of the Hearst Ranch. And another thing that people don't know is that the land grant was just one chunk of land. And there were a lot of little inholdings and dairy farms, and Phoebe went and sort of managed to buy out and sort of assemble the ranch into one big contiguous piece. So she was another shrewd businesswoman. My grandfather was surrounded by smart women. Maybe that was the secret of his success.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard any specific stories about them spending time at the Hearst Ranch. But I liked what Will said at the end there about him spending time around a lot of smart women. And it reminds me that Hearst was very egalitarian. If the best person for a job was a woman, the woman got the job every time. Some of the highest paid writers on the Hearst paper were women. He had a real respect for women and their input.
Question from Carol. Did Hearst provide for Davies in his will? And if so, what are we talking?
Yeah.
Well, Lara, you're more of an expert on that. I think the answer is yes, but the details are in Lara's book, which I didn't know the details until I read her book.
Yes, it's a long and complicated story, but the short version is yes. And she had provided for him. She essentially, her donation and a couple of other donations essentially saved the Hearst Corporation from bankruptcy in the mid-30s. And Hearst felt very beholden to her for that. And so when it came time to draft his will, he was advised by some of the people who were advising him on his will that if he wanted to be sure that Marion would have something from him, he would need to explicitly include her because of the community property law in California. Half of everything that he owned would automatically go to Millicent. So he did, and it was a huge a huge thing that Hearst gave Marion in his will. And it was the root of some of the fallouts with the Hearst sons, because the Hearst sons felt that this was sort of jeopardizing their future. And we can talk also about how before Hearst's death, Marion and the sons were very close. I have video of them. You know, in Europe being really chummy, and Bill trying on Marion's hats, and it's all really a beautiful relationship. And then after he died, and after this whole thing with the will, it fell apart. And that, I think, was a really great heartbreak of Marion's, that this fallout with the sons happened.
Did
Yeah, I
your
think that's
dad ever
right.
talk about this, Will? Did your dad ever speak of Marion?
No, he never, I never remember him ever saying any sort of cross words or, you know, resentful things. I do think she was treated badly at my time of my grandfather's death, because they sort of didn't tell her that he had died, and they took the body out of the house before she was awakened. So there was some bad behavior there. I was distracted a little bit by the story about smart women, because I remember when my great grandfather died, and when he was making his will, his attorney said, "Now you need to name someone as an executor." And he said, "Well, I'm going to name my wife." And he said, "Well, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have your wife be the executor." He said, "No, believe me, she's going to be a better steward of my wealth than anybody that I could hire." And that's what he did. So my great grandfather left everything to his wife, including the power to be the executor of his will. And she ran what you might call the Hearst Corporation between his death in 1890 and her death in 1920. So for 30 years, she was really the CEO. WR was doing newspapers, but she was keeping an eye on the books.
We have gone a little bit over. I hope that's okay with all of our guests. This has been fascinating. There are much more questions, some of which I don't know if I'm even allowed to ask. So we'll save those for next time, hopefully for part 2 of Marion Davies' biography, when we have Lara, Will, and Bill back. I am so grateful to all 3 of you for joining Alta Live this afternoon. Lara Gabrielle, author of the new book, Captain of Her Soul, The Life of Marion Davies. We're going to shoot you a link to that via email. Alta editor and publisher, my boss, Will Hurst, for coming today, and Bill Deverell, director of the California Institute for the Huntington USC Institute on California and the West, and a professor at USC. I'd like to, before you all leave, I'd like to invite you next week. I am so excited to welcome to Alta Live Tung Chang. He is the creative studio director of Heath Ceramics. Our Alta's current issue is that we're calling it the craft issue made in California. Heath, I am sure most of you are familiar with, is an incredible pottery and ceramics studio. So please do join us for that. That's Wednesday, November 16th at 12:30. Again, hoping you're joining us at Alta. As a member, as an attendee at all of these events, we are so grateful for you coming today. Take care. Bye all.
Thanks. Bye, Laura. Bye,
Bye.
Bill.